Father, we do want to recognize the fact that you take us through miry clay, you lift us up on the rock, and you bring things into our lives that make us stronger and better. And as we look at the words of Solomon in Ecclesiastes, we ask that you would give us wisdom and insight as to how we might be able to live a stronger, better life as we serve you. In Jesus' name, amen. Have you ever misjudged a person? Not you, right? You know, a person that you met and you kind of got that idea of what they might be or who they are. And well, there's a story that has been long told from Malcolm Forbes about a couple. There's a couple that came and they took the train to Boston, and they got off the train, and they walked up to Harvard University. And as they entered into Harvard University, they went into the president's secretary's office, and they approached the secretary and asked to see the president of the school. Now, this is a couple that was dressed in faded. She had a faded dress on, and he had a thread-borne suit on that. They didn't look like a couple that you would think that would be going into Harvard University. And they said, "We'd like to see the president." And the lady looked at him in disgust and think, "Oh my goodness, well, the president's not here right now." And they said, "Well, we'll wait." And they said, "Well, the president, he's not going to be in all day." And he goes, "Then we'll wait." And they sat down and they waited and waited for hours. And of course, the secretary got more disgusted of them being there. And the president was there. And so she finally went back there and says, there's this couple that's out in the lobby. They want to speak to you. Can you just come out and just kind of appease them and give them a few words? They're ragamuffins, and I just want to, be able to get them out of the office. So the president, in disgust, gets up and says, "Why do I got to waste my time with this?" And walks out and introduces himself to the couple. And the lady, the wife, says to him, our son attended Harvard University a few years ago, and he had passed away suddenly a year ago. And we would like to build a memorial for our son. And of course, it didn't faze him, any. It's like, ma'am, if we were to build a memorial for every individual who had passed away who had attended Harvard, the place would look like a cemetery, and we just can't be having that. And she goes, "Oh, no. We don't want a statue, a memorial. We want a building that we would like to build in honor of our son." And the president looks at her and says, "Ma'am, do you realize that this is Harvard University? This is $7.5 million of campus, and you want to build a building?" And she heard him say $7.5 million for the campus. And she looked to her husband and she goes, "Is that all it takes to build a university? Well, we probably should go and build our own university instead." And of course, the president was kind of dumbfounded when she said that, didn't really understand the whole process of what she was going through. And Mr. and Mrs. Leland Stanford got up and walked out of the Harvard president's office. Now, obviously, they were welcomed at Palomino, California, where they did build a university named after them, Stanford University, in honor of their son who had passed away, that Harvard University didn't care anything about. So the president kind of mischaracterized these individuals. And, we can do that in our lives too, not only with people, but we can do that with situations as well. Situations that we find ourselves. We look at the situation and we think that it has nothing to do for us, or it's not going to do any good for us. And Solomon approaches that with these 14 verses that he talks about a better life. In fact, 11 times he says in this chapter the term better. He mentions something, and then he says something that's better than that. And he goes back and forth throughout this, because there is something always better. And when I say this is for a better life, we all could look at our lives and say, you know what? We could be better. And we could get better in our lives. So the question is, what then is better? He gives us 7 different things in avenue of our lives that we might be able to apply to ourselves that could make us better. The first number 1 is be a better person, or be a person of character. Be a person of character allows you to have a better life. He begins, again, we're in Ecclesiastes. We're just going to work our way through this passage of Scripture. Ecclesiastes 7:1 says, a good name is better than fine perfume. The day of your death is better than the day of your birth. He puts in context, first of all, he says, a good name is better than good perfume or fine perfume. And in fact, if you understand the ancient days, when you went to an event, a joyous occasion, you would put on a perfume. You would adorn yourself with some type of anointment as you would go into that particular event. But you would also use perfume for another reason. The other reason is to get rid of the stench that you might have on your body, because they didn't take showers like you and I take showers, and they rode camels everywhere that they went, and they were in the sun, and you could get a little ripe during that course of a day or 2 or 3 or 4 or a week before you got to the shower again. So you would also put on some type of anointment, a perfume, to be able to hide that so that other people could stand to be around you. So it was used for a couple of reasons, and it was used for a purpose in the life. It was used to cover up and or to cover up, because either way it was a cover up when you looked at it. Now, those types of things happened all the time. And in fact, some perfumes were more expensive than other perfumes. You remember Mary of Bethany? She took a jar of perfume and came and anointed Jesus' feet, dried it with the hair. And of course, Judas pipes up. He says, that could have been sold for 300 denarii. Yeah, or the equivalence of today would be $25,000 to $35,000 is what she poured on Jesus that day. Of course, he went into she's preparing me for my burial, and so on and so on. But the whole idea about perfume is an outward thing. It's an outward cover-up of what is inward. And Solomon is talking about here, he says, it's not the outward that's important, but rather it's the inward person. A good name is better than fine perfume. It's not just a cologne that you can wear just because you got out of basketball practice and you stinketh, but rather it's something that you do inside your life. The way you live your life is better even yet. The name is important, to be able to leave behind a good name. Now, if you were to go out in the parking lot and all of a sudden my kids would love this, there sits a Porsche just sitting there, and you walked up to the Porsche, you would look at it and say, piece of junk. No, you wouldn't say that at all. You would look at that and say, it's a Porsche. It's a fine machine. It's quality. It's got a huge price tag as well on it. But it was made with good quality put into it. And so Porsche has a name for itself. And the same thing can be true with other things in our lives. If you walk around and I come out to the Home Depot and I can smell that great smell that's in the air, waffling from the restaurants that are nearby. You got Applebee's, you got Starlight, you got all that's coming that direction, and the perfume, the smell is wonderful, but that doesn't tell you what's inside. You have to go in and you have to eat of the food. And if the food is good, then you would tell others about it. That restaurant has a name for itself, not because of the smell that is in the air, but rather because of the food that is cooked inside the building. The same thing is true with our lives. We can smell great, but inside not be so good when it comes to our character. And Solomon is bringing that together to have a good name, to have a good name to the people around. Your name is mentioned, and somebody might say, it's like, well, how, or what would they say, about your name? Oh, yeah, I know that person. They, such and such. Oh, yeah, I know that person. They're such and such and such. You can have a good name about yourself. And that's what Solomon's talking about. He's talking about for us to have a good name for the people around us. There's a judge in Washington state. He approached drunk drivers a little bit differently than what other people. He would always give them two options. You have two options. You've been caught drunk driving. You've been convicted as a drunk driver. Option number one, you can go to a Alcoholics Anonymous program. And it's not just one of those classes. It's a program. It's a full program that you would go through. You can do that. Or option number two, you can put this bumper sticker on the back of your car that says, I am a convicted drunk driver. He didn't have very many takers for the sticker. Why? Because it represents their name. And nobody wants to have a good name. They would rather just go to the event or go to the program, get the thing out of the way, and get invested in that versus having their name be tarnished on the back of their vehicle. So Solomon is talking about having a good character, having a good name. And then he goes on, he says, the day of your death is more important than the day of your birth. Now, he's not saying that you shouldn't be born. He's not saying, well, because in order to die, you have to be born. So he's not saying that one shouldn't be born, but rather the day of your death is more important than the day of your birth. He's using this contrast of two things. The day in which you received your name at the day of your birth, and the day in which your name is printed in the obituary. There's a span between those. I always call it the dash of your life. You see a tombstone and you see the birth date, and then there's a dash, and then there's the death date on the tombstone. But it's the dash of your life that is significant. It's the dash of your life that people remember. And he's talking about the fact that when your name appears in your obituary, that's even more important than the day you appears in the birth records that's out there, because the day of your death represents your life. That name represents everything that's within there. And he's saying to rejoice, or to live our lives in such a way that when we die, people can look back on your life and recognize the good character of who you are. The Indians had a great saying. It goes like this: when you were born, you cried, and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice because you've lived a life well. So that's character. That's character, to be able to die well and to have people remember who you were and how you lived your life, to be of good character. The second thing he talks about is that we should do to be able to have a better life is to take a tour of a mortuary. You say, well, is that what well, let's read it. Verse 2. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart. The house of mourning. The house of mourning in biblical days, when one would die, they would quickly prepare the body and they would put it into the tomb, and then they would come back to the house for 7 days of mourning. They would mourn the loss of the individual that had passed on. So better to go to a house of mourning, he says, than to go to a party. Or one might say that it's better to go to a funeral like what we have today than to go on a vacation or a cruise or something great in your life. Better to be involved in that, because see, this is what happens when you go to the house of mourning. It reminds you of your destiny. It lets you know where you too will be one day. Today, 147,276 people will die. and they will have that destiny met for them. We all will get there. In fact, it's said that 1 out of 1 Americans die. And today, people are going to die that never died before. It's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. You have a birth date if you're living today, and there will be a death date. And going to the mortuary, but basically what Solomon's saying is that when you go to the mortuary, when you go to the funeral, when you go to this, it's a somber or sober reminder of yours and my destiny. That day will come. We don't know when that day will be, but we know it will come. So the way we live today determines what happens on that day of our death, and we will come. If you were to walk by a funeral grave, Nathan Hathaway says it this way: if you were to walk a grave, wherever it is found, is a short and pity sermon for the soul. Basically, what it's saying is, see you later. See you later. Because we all reach there. Every one of us will become a statistic of death in the United States. We all get there. A lot of people think that they're going to live forever, but they're not. Immortality is not, it's not here. It will never be here. Life will end. It may end sooner for some and later for others, but it does come. So he says, visit a mortuary. Better to be in the house of mourning than to be in the house of festival, or death is death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take heart. And yet, how many people live their lives as if they're never going to die? But it comes. It's, oh, you shouldn't be talking about that. Well, that's just the reality of life. It's the reality of life. Number 3, he says, make time for sadness. Make time for sadness. He goes on and he says, in verse 3, he says, frustration is better than laughter, because a sad face is good for the heart. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure. Now, he's not coming across saying that we ought not ever be happy. He's not saying, thou shalt not smile, or thou shalt not laugh, or thou shalt not have fun in life. He's not saying that at all. But what he's saying is that sometimes we just need to recognize life around us and maybe become a little sad and somber when we look at those things, because we need to take heed of the things around us. I mean, look what's happening over at Israel right now. Look what happened with the many people over there. That should cause us to think about sadness. That should cause us to think, what kind of world we live in. And it should spur us to move toward Jesus Christ. It should to move towards God and get closer to Him, because we know that He's not involved in that. He'll allow it, but He doesn't cause it. And so he says, we should look at and be a part of a sadness or a sad face. The Proverbs, like I said, he's not saying that we shouldn't be happy. He says in the book of Proverbs several times, a merry heart makes a cheerful conscience. He who is of a merry heart has a continuous feast. And he says a merry heart does good for medicine. So laughter is good for us. It's good to be able to be a part of and laughing and such as that. But at the same time, it's not the only thing that's in our life. Sorrow is also a part of our lives. Okay, so we have a song we sing, I'm trading my sorrow for His joy, but we do have sorrow. And laughter is good, but if you look at it, laughter itself sometimes is just a cover-up. Mark Twain put it this way. He said he was sad and depressed within his life, and sometimes humor just allowed him to have a cover-up. This is a surprising statement. Sammy Davis Jr., if you remember him, he said that he hated his life and that my life was empty, and yet he was a great comedian. Look at, I used his name last week. Yeah, that's Robin Williams. Same thing. Look at his life. And humor just covered up the sadness of who he is. So sadness, there is a place for that in our life. Look at what Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount. He said, blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who mourn. Why so is that? In fact, if you look at blessed, it's really is happy. So you could translate it as happy are those who are unhappy, basically. It's like, well, how is that even possible? Sometimes we need to have that in our lives. We need to recognize that. It allows us then to be able to resonate and to be able to associate with other people that are in the same place. Think about Job himself. I mean, Job had everything taken away from him, and he said, and yet he still was fine with it because he was in the sorrow of his life. Happy are those who mourn. There's a time for sorrow, and there's a time for joy. Old Proverbs said this way, an Arab proverb puts it this way. It says, all sunshine makes a desert. And if you think about it, we got to have a little rain sometimes in our lives. There's another poem that went this way. I walked a mile with pleasure, and she chattered all the way, but left me none the wiser for all she had to say. I walked a mile with sorrow, and never heard a word that she said. But oh, the things I learned from her as sorrow walked with me. There's a lot of truth in that. Sometimes we just need to be quiet. Sometimes we just, even the proverb says, even a fool looks wise when they keep their mouth shut. Sometimes we just have to be quiet. Sometimes we just have to settle in. Sometimes we just have to have that sorrowful look about ourselves. A great teacher, a great instructor would teach us to have that time within our lives. He says here, look at that latter part of the verse. It says that the heart is wise in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure. In other words, the foolish person covers up all things by that which is pleasurable in their lives. They just want to fill it, fill it, fill it. Sometimes we just need to have to sit back and just be and let the world around us be quiet and listen. It was weird yesterday. Yesterday I was getting ready to leave the Home Depot, and we had a circuit breaker go out. The music was turned off. Lights were turned down. And I walked out, and it was kind of an eerie feeling. It's like, but it was also it was a pleasant feeling. It was like, this is nice. It's quiet. There's nobody in here. And it was like, I think it was like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was just quiet. Hardly no customers. Nobody's like, ooh, it was neat. Sometimes we have to be in that role every once in a while. Number 4, he says, welcome constructive criticism. Welcome constructive criticism. It is better to heed the rebuke of a wise person than to listen to the song of a fool. Like a crackling of thorns under a pot, so the laughter of fools. This too is meaningless. Extorting turns a wise person into a fool, and the bribe corrupts the heart. Nobody really enjoys rebuke. You don't walk around and have somebody come and say, hey, can you do me a favor? Will you rebuke me? I haven't been rebuked in a while. Just, can you give me a good rebuking? Nobody does that. Nobody seeks after. Can you criticize me a little bit? I just need some criticism. But Solomon says constructive criticism, it is good. Sometimes you have to have life looked at through the eyes of somebody else. somebody else needs to look at you and say, well, I don't know, or maybe you shouldn't have done that, or, well, I don't know if that, and we should welcome that. He says to welcome that in, but it's just not natural, is it? It's not a natural thing. I remember when you were in school and the teacher gave you some corrective words, or maybe as you were younger, the corrective paddle, or, it was what was it called? The Board of Education, as they would say when I was in school. Nobody wanted that. Or the officer that gives you that little piece of paper. Have a great day. Slow down. It's just some corrective criticism that's going your way. But, we don't look for it. We don't seek it out in our lives. Maybe the judge passes down a sentence that you aren't really in favor of, or the pastor says something from the pulpit that, I don't know about that in my life, but it's constructive criticism nonetheless when it comes into our lives. And he says, the fool sings the song. The fool just galloping goes along and does whatever, and doesn't have a care in the world, and everybody else is looking at him as they are just that, a fool, in the way that they're acting and living their lives. But and it even says that it's like the crackling of thorns in the fire, or as I would say, if you were to take some pine needles and throw them in the campfire, they go and they're gone. That's what a fool is when it comes to their life and living their lives. It doesn't go anywhere. But a good rebuke is healthy for our lives. It gives us perspective. It gives us a new look as to how we might live our lives and in the things that we do. And it's good to be able to do that. It's good to have that in our lives. Remember David? David sinned, and he's in the palace, and he thought he had everything all taken care of. He took in Bathsheba, and he took in and he murdered the husband, and everything was cool and everything. And then the prophet comes in and he says, "You are that man." It's like, ooh, that's a rebuke. That's a constructive rebuke. And it kind of got his head around, the fact that he did something he shouldn't have done, and he shouldn't have hit it the way he did. And then, in fact, he writes this psalm. He says, "Let a righteous man strike me, that is kindness. Let him rebuke me, and that is oil on my head. The head will not refuse it, for my prayer will still be against the heads of the evildoers." In other words, a righteous man coming along, a righteous individual coming along to bring you into line of your life and the way we should live our lives is what David is saying when he writes that. And Solomon could be thinking of that. He obviously, it was his father. He understood what his father had gone through, and he read his words in the Psalms and what have you. And so he puts these words in the book of Proverbs as he would write. Proverbs 15:5, it says, "A fool despises his father's instructions, but he who receives correction is prudent." And in Proverbs 17:10, it says, "Rebuke is more effective for a wise man than 100 blows to a fool." The idea of a fool just will not respond to all the correction, but a wise man takes notice. In other words, somebody that's not going to receive whatever you say, you could hit them over the head 100 times with the same thing, and they're still not going to do what they should do. But a wise man will accept that. So he says to be wise. Proverbs 25:12, he says, "Like an ornament of fine gold is a wise rebuker to the ordinate ears." We need to have a good rebuking. We need to have a correction, a direction changer in our lives, and to be able to have that person that'll come alongside us and give us a swift kick in the butt every once in a while to get us going in the right direction. But it's got to come from a godly individual. It's got to come somebody that has an understanding of the individual and be able to correct them. There was a great preacher, John Wesley, in the 1700s, and back then, he would wear his bow tie. They would wear a bow tie, and one day he had a brand new bow tie, and he's up there preaching away, and he had the tails were just a little bit long for the care of an individual who was out in the audience, and she was out there. She was kind of a critical person, and she's been known to be a critical person, and she couldn't hear a word he said because the tails of his bow tie were just too long. And he didn't say it. So finally the message was over, and she went up to John Wesley, and she says, "Sir, I just want to let you know that the tails on your tie, they offend me. They're too long." And John Wesley looks at her and says, "Well, just a moment. Has anybody got any scissors, any shears around here?" And they got us some shears, and he handed them to the lady and says, "Here, go ahead, cut them to your liking." And she gets up there and she snips them and gets them to where she liked it. And she goes, "Is that to your liking? Do you like that? Does that not offend you now?" And she goes, "Yes, I like that. That's good." He goes, "Great. I'm sure that you wouldn't mind if I did a little trimming as well, if you would hand me the shears. Madam, your tongue, please. I believe your tongue is a little long, and it offends me." You know, coming from a godly man, a rebuke to this woman. You know, sometimes you need that. And he knew that this woman was a critical woman that criticizes everybody. And so he was just going to fix her up a little bit, give her a little trimming off her tongue, so that she wouldn't be able to do that. And Solomon says that we need to receive constructive criticism in our lives. And it does need to be constructive. There are a lot of people now, you know, when you're going down the road and somebody tells you you're number one, that might not be constructive. Might be a little bit, you know, diminishing, if any, to say the least, you know, in your life. So, number 5, he says, learn patience along the way. Learn patience along the way. Picking it up in verse 8, he says, the end of the matter is better than the beginning, and patience is better than pride. Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of a fool. Do not say, why, the old days were better than these, for it is not wise to ask such a question. He says that the end is better than the beginning. He's talking about, you know, this process that we go in through. Because if we don't have the patience in the midst of it, then a dream that begins to be a dream without the patience to get to the end will never come true. A relationship from the beginning will never make it to the end without patience in the midst. Everything that we do in our lives from the beginning to the end is chock full of patience within the middle. And we need to have the patience to be able to carry out and to be able to get to the end of whatever it is. The end is better, he says. Because, see, the thing is, once you get to the end and you see the fulfillment of the dream, or you see the fulfillment of whatever it is that you're carrying on and going through, then all the patience that you needed in the midst was for a benefit of the end that was in store for you. And we need to recognize that. It's the patience within the midst that allows us to be able to get to the end wherever it is. Whether it be from birth to death, from project to project, or wherever it is in our lives, we need to have that patience within our lives. Have you ever prayed for that one? You know, it's like, wow, you know, I just pray for patience, you know, I pray that God would give me patience. And, you know, we this is how that prayer goes a lot of times. It's like, God, give me patience and give it to me now. It's like, okay, you're not going to gain the patience that way. In fact, patience comes through the process of trials and tribulations within our lives. There was a young man who went up to the minister and he asked, would you pray that God would give me patience? And the minister said, well, that would be wonderful. Yes, I absolutely will pray that God would give you patience. So he smiled and he wrapped his arm around the young man and he began to pray just like this. It says, certainly I will pray. And he says, Father, send this young man some adversity, some tribulations, and some trials. And the boy says, wait a minute, ho, stop. I wasn't praying for that. I want you to pray for patience. And he goes, oh, but young man, Don't you know the words of Paul in the book of Romans where it says, tribulation worketh patience? Patience comes out of tribulation. Patience comes out of trials in our lives. Patience comes out with the adversity that comes in our life. It allows us to be able to move through. And when we get to the other end of it, we look back and we say, wow, I was able to get through that. The challenges of life, the difficulties of our lives, the way that we would go. And he says that it is through that process that we get patience in our lives. And then he says, do not say, why were the old days better than these? The old days were better than, the good old days, the good old days. For that is a foolish question to ask. We have that idea of the good old days. Well, the good old days really is a bad memory with a creative imagination. That's what the good old days were. We don't really remember what the good old days were. The good old days weren't really all that good if you really go back there. The reason that if you ever listen to a set of songs and the best of the oldies, or and they would play a little bit and then they would play a little bit, these different songs, and I can't remember the seconds now, but there's a definite number of seconds, not minutes, seconds that 8 seconds within that song that you would listen to, and then they would change to the next song. Because after that, the happiness goes away, and then you think about the bad things that happened during that. And they want to keep that song moving to be able to inspire you and not allow you to think of what really happened in the good old days. Because a song will bring those things about if you listen to all of it, if you listen to the entire thing. So the good old days weren't always necessarily the good old days. It's just a bad memory with a creative imagination as we look back at it. Because, after all, we don't want the good old days to be bad by any means. One poet puts it this way. He says, seize the day. Let this day be the best. Because really, if you think about it, we only have now to navigate. We can't navigate the past. That's already been navigated for us. And we don't get to navigate the future because we're not there yet. We can navigate now. What we do now is what we need to do when it comes to our lives. And so we need to make sure that we use all of our resources for what we do today, which will allow us to be able to then get into tomorrow and the next day and the next day. Number 6, he says, make wisdom your defense. He says, wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing and benefits those who see the sun. Wisdom is a shelter as money is a shelter. But the advantage of knowledge is this: wisdom preserves those who have it. Or as it says in the NIV, or the New Living Translation, it says, wisdom is even better when you have money. Both are a benefit to you as you go through life. Wisdom and money can get you almost anything, but only wisdom can save your life. You can have both. Wisdom allows you to be able to manage the money portion. You can have both, but the money is not going to save your life. And that's why Solomon says to have wisdom. Wisdom is important. Wisdom is the way that we should live our lives. We should humble ourselves. Jesus says, be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And so many times we go around being wise as doves and gentle as serpents, which isn't so gentle when you think about it. But wisdom is what, and Solomon says in Proverbs, says, get wisdom. In fact, basically says, get wisdom with all your getting, to put it that way. Get wisdom with all you can. Get it. And he speaks of, in Ecclesiastes that we're in, 28 times he speaks of wisdom. In Proverbs, he speaks of it 125 times. He talks about getting wisdom. Wisdom. But the question is, what is wisdom? What is wisdom? If we're supposed to have wisdom, what is wisdom? Well, biblical wisdom is basically where you place God in your life. Where you place God in your life. Is God on the outside of your life? Is God on the inside of your life? Do you walk as God would have you walk? That's where wisdom. Fear of God, the fear of the Lord, begins with wisdom. Wisdom is the driver. Wisdom is the one who brings us along. Wisdom shouts from the mountaintop and leads us in such a way. But wisdom is knowing and understanding and practicing the things that God would have us get. Wisdom is the skill of living godly, is basically what wisdom is when it comes to wisdom. Now, there's other definitions out there of wisdom, but basically what it comes down to is being able to have a high IQ or having knowledge and what have you. But biblical wisdom is living our lives in such a way that God would put his stamp of approval on it. So he says, get wisdom. And then the last thing he puts here in this, he comes to is trust God to balance out your life. Trust God to balance out your life. Accept the way God does things. For who can straighten what has been made crooked? Enjoy prosperity while you can. But when hard times strike, realize that both come from God. Remember that nothing is certain in life. And then he goes on, and we're going to look at the rest of it next week. Basically, it sums up with this, is that consider the work of God in your life. Everything that comes within your life is a work of God. Everything that comes along is a work of God. We should ponder it, think about it, think about what God is doing. We don't do enough of that. We don't do enough of pondering. We don't do enough thinking because we have Hollywood. Hollywood makes it almost impossible sometimes for us to really sit and think and ponder upon the things of the Lord. And yet we need to do that. We would rather get up and be entertained all day, go to work, be entertained. It's amazing when I'm in the break room how many times people talk about the gazillion shows that they watch. And I think, how in the world do you have time to watch all those TV shows? You go to work and then you watch all these shows. That's almost like a full-time job in itself. And then you take a little nap and you come back to work. It just hours upon hours of what. I mean, I get, half hour, 45 minutes a day in? That's enough for me. There's just too much stuff to do in the course of the day outside of being entertained. And I've always said this to my kids. They say, reality TV is really fun to watch, but just remember, reality TV is not reality. It's not even close to reality. And it's, well, what is reality? Boring. Yeah, reality is boring. That's all it is. You do what you can to get through life, and you hope to be able to touch different people in your life as you go through. But overall, it's just it is what you make it. And God is saying to lean upon Him. Let Him guide your path. Let God balance your life and move you through. James put it this way. He says, now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we'll go to this city or that city and spend a year there and carry on business and make some money. Why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. We don't. We don't know. I mean, we make plans, and it's okay to make plans. We should make plans. If you're going to go on a vacation, you should make plans for the vacation, but just know that you don't know if you're going to make it to that vacation. If you're going to go out of town, make plans, but just know there might be something that interferes with that process. You lean everything upon God. You allow God to be able to guide and direct you, and God knows how to balance our life. He gives us enough blessings to make us happy. He gives us enough sorrow to keep us humble. That's a balance of our life, humbleness and happiness. It's the way we should live our lives, trusting in the Lord. I mean, Job, I'm going to go back to Job. I mentioned him earlier, but remember Job? He had everything. everything was taken away from him. And then his godly wife comes up to him and gives him some godly advice and says, curse God and die. And of course, what Job say to her is like, you foolish woman, should I accept only good things from God and not accept bad as well? You know, naked I came into the world, naked I shall leave. You know, it doesn't matter how many riches you acquire in this life. You came in without it, and you'll leave without it. That's just the way it is. There's no U-Haul behind a hearse. Haven't seen one yet, anyways. You know, there are some people that are buried in their car, which is, you know, that's a sad thing. A good piece of equipment being put in the ground. You know, but you can't take it with you. You might as well use it now. Use it for good. Use it for the things around you. And Job understood that. And we should live our lives in a way that God will balance us. God will give us the things. We dare never make the mistake that the Harvard president made when things come into our lives. Because sometimes things come into our lives to make us better. Sometimes things come into our lives to allow us to have greater patience. To, you know, as iron sharpens iron, so also one man sharpens another. Sometimes you have to have a little heat to make something valuable. And God brings the heat and the good times in our lives to be able to live. The balance comes from Him. The thing that we need to do is follow the wisdom, trusting in Him, allowing Him to guide and direct us in our lives every step of the way. And allow all these other things in our lives to be able to give us a better perspective on our destination, where we will be one day, on how we might be able to interact with and show empathy. You know, sympathy's great, empathy's better. Been there, done that. I can talk with you. I can share with you. I understand in our lives, and we can come alongside another individual. Constructive criticism is huge. It allows us to become better at the things that we do in life. And we should receive that with open arms. From an individual who knows, never from an individual who doesn't care about you, just wants to give you a hard time. That's not constructive criticism. Let these 7 things better your life that Solomon gives us, that we might be able to live and have a balanced life when we live our lives for Christ. Thanksgiving is coming. Let us be thankful, even for the bad things that come our way, because they do make us better. Father, we rejoice in the fact that you gave us wisdom through Solomon. You gave us words that might be hard to digest, hard to take into our lives, and yet at the same time it makes us a better individual. It makes us a better follower of Jesus Christ. It makes us a better brother and sister in the Lord to be able to come alongside of one another. Help us to heed these things, to apply them to our lives, that we might serve you in a greater way. As we come together this week as family and friends and rejoice and give thanksgiving, let it be a time of being able to lift one another up, to draw near to one another, to be able to rejoice with each other and have a good time with you in the midst. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a wonderful day, and, go to a funeral this week. I don't know.